Hey, everybody, and welcome to Learning from Smart People. I am your host, Rob Oliver, and I have another smart person with me today. His name is Todd Randall. He is an 8-time CEO and a business coach from rural Florida with $6 million in yearly revenue and a passion for polo. He flies around the world to participate in polo matches, all while managing his businesses remotely. Todd, welcome to the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob.
Absolutely. So let's start here. Let's start with your backstory. Like, were you interested in polo like for a long time? Talk to me about kind of how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, it's a little ostentatious sometimes, but I think the story makes people wonder because you can't travel the world and travel to horse ranches in the middle of Africa and manage businesses for the most part. But I've been able to accomplish that just because of the way my businesses are run. So I started as a clinician, actually. I practiced pharmacy for a handful of years, but I always knew that I wanted to be a business person. That's what drove me. And so I practiced. I did a handful of small businesses when I was in high school and college, and they were terrible. I I failed. The best kind of consultant. People say all the time, well, you failed at a few businesses. Does that make you a better or worse coach? And I think infinitely better because my job as a coach or a consultant is to help you avoid mistakes. And no lessons are better learned than the ones you got bloody on, right? So yeah, I was in corporate America for quite a while, 20, 20 years maybe, until I got the itches, as many people do, just to do my own thing. And I started with just the opportunity that was in front of me. I didn't have some great product idea. I wasn't given a boatload of money to go buy a business like some people are. I just didn't have any genius idea. So I took the opportunity that was in front of me and I made the very most of it, and then on to the next and on to the next. Next thing you know, I had, 6 businesses running at the same time. And I finally could take a chill pill and ask myself, what have I been doing all this for? And that's where the poll came up. It's like always wanted to try it. And here's my opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just give you a sports analogy, and that is, I think about like Wayne Gretzky as a coach and Michael Jordan as a GM. You know, they see the game in a way. They have an expertise, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, sometimes it feels like it's the it's the average players that make better coaches because they've had to learn they've had to learn the game themselves. They've had to understand the game didn't come to them easy. It was something that they had to work at and something that they had to overcome, and they had continually work on a regular basis to improve their own game and overcome that. What are your thoughts on that analogy?
Yeah, I love it. In fact, I love the examples you gave too. By the way, I noticed you said Gretzky and not Messier. Is that going to make some of your city folk angry?
What we'll leave that alone.
Okay, fair enough. So you picked the perfect examples because Jordan and Gretzky, what do they have in common? They have in common a work ethic that is legendary. Like they are students of the game in the same way that Tiger Woods was a student of the game. If you talk to him at a post-event conference, he'll talk to you, wow, this reminds me of when Gary Player in 1976 had that such and such. Or Michael Jordan will say, my biggest competitors are whoever, Larry Bird at the time or Magic Johnson. And here are the strengths of their game. And here's what I needed to bring in order to overcome those. Like they were real masters of the academic and masters of their work ethic. And I think that's the reason that they became good coaches. Um, now, on the other hand, I would agree with you that sometimes the B players can become great coaches, better coaches, because of this little known thing, which is job skill, and this flustered me for my first couple jobs in corporate because I was the best salesperson on my team, and I kept getting overlooked by somebody else in corporate who would eventually become my manager. And I thought, well, geez, they're not as good a salesperson as I am. How could they lead the team as well as I could? And then I finally got my shot and I started managing a team and I realized that these are different skills. Like to be a great person is not the skill you need to manage an 8-person sales team. It's, some of the skills are useful, insight for sure, right? But you could have some insight and, the manager skills and be a much better manager.
Yeah. What? Okay. And again, this is something that I've mentioned on the podcast more than once, and that is, in a sales organization, you have someone who is a fantastic salesperson, and
Mm-hmm.
the biggest mistake is to promote them to management because management and people skills are not their skill. Their skill set is sales, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they don't have the wherewithal to teach other people to do what they do, or to communicate what they're doing, and in that way. And on another level, I think this relates to entrepreneurship in this manner, where people don't go into a lot of people don't become entrepreneurs because they are passionate about the business side of numbers and all of that stuff. They have a
Yeah.
skill set, or they've got something that, they've got an idea and they want to run with that, but the business side is secondary. And in some ways, it sounds like your story is a little bit the opposite, in which you kind of had the business acumen and you took advantage of the opportunity that was in front of you. So you built it backwards from most people, how most people do. Is that accurate?
I say that is accurate. And I think the lessons I learned at corporate were perfect for me to go back out into the field and be an entrepreneur again. Because what I realized relatively early is that most jobs require some skill. And the reason I was actually the best salesperson on my team was not because I was a natural salesperson, but because I promised them that I could learn anything. And I was interesting enough that they gave me a shot. And then in the organization, I just went and I found the two or three best people at it. And I said, how are you the best at it? And inevitably, they would say, I don't know, I'm just natural, I'm gifted, right? But if you studied them carefully, they did have habits that other people didn't, that set them apart from the rest. And so, yeah, I think my career is an interesting metaphor for people who are wondering if they can be an entrepreneur, because I was not an entrepreneur. I just realized that entrepreneurship should have some skill base. And I went out and practiced those skills until I became good enough at them to try. And the rest is history. Now, what a great entrepreneur will tell you is that you're ready now to try. But I wasn't interested in being that bloody,
Okay.
because
Yep.
it's a bloody game, entrepreneurship. There's a reason why people quote the statistic constantly: 90% of businesses fail. Well, there's a reason 90% of business fails, because unprepared people, you know, have opportunities in front of them and they just can't say no. They walk headlong into it without enough capital or experience, or without enough, help. And they go down swinging, and they'll tell you sometimes that it was fun.
Right.
But if you're going to succeed, yeah, I mean, it takes prep.
Sure. Okay. I want to go back kind of and talk about something like you talked about how you kind of happened into entrepreneurship, where you found an opportunity that was in front of you, and then
Yeah.
you talked about how you found yourself kind of with six businesses and kind of like, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go from here?
Yeah.
And and you have kind of those experiences where you get somewhere and then you begin to ask yourself questions. And do you have do you have help for so that people don't have to, like, they can start asking themselves the questions proactively without having to wait to get to those kind of intersections before they're making decisions about which direction they're headed? Does that
Oh
make
my gosh.
sense?
I love coaching young people because the gap is so great. The choices are just so clean, right? Like I have, I was the first business. Let me tell you the first business I made, because I think there's a story in it, right? I was ready. I had money saved up in my 401k. I had built all this business acumen, and I was ready to step out, but I didn't have a vehicle. Some people, they have this great idea and they're like, oh, great, I'll stop and fund it myself and invent the Rubik's Cube. I didn't have one. And so I kept talking to people who are business owners and saying, how did you start? How did you start? And I had all these big shot friends at the time, because I was in big companies, right? And they were like, well, you have to take all the opportunities in front of you and you have to evaluate them for their, net operating income, or their return on committed capital, or you have to establish a hurdle rate, Todd. Like, don't look at opportunities that you expect to return less than 15%. And I'm like, whoa, what? I don't have opportunities, plural. I need one. I just need one. And I think there are a lot of people like me that don't have an opportunity. There's not a vehicle. And like my friend Tom, he's a CEO of a hotel chain. And he bought and sold hotels for a living his whole life, right? So he worked for somebody and he did that. And he told me it's easy. You just take, all the hotels you want to buy and you put in front of you and you pick the best one. Like, those are $100 million investments. Who has that kind of capital? But it was his world. It's the world he grew up in. And so that was his opinion. And I didn't have opportunities. I had one, right? So I ran into a person who was an executive like myself at a big company. And all of a sudden, like, he quit and he started showing up to the gym in sandals and a tank top t-shirt every Tuesday. And I'm like, you're more relaxed than you were. He's like, oh yeah, I just started my own business and I wanted to know what it was. And it was a franchise. It was a business that someone else had started and gave him the rights to open up a location. Right. And he was miserably happy. He was miserably happy. And I said, well, franchise, isn't that easy or isn't that beneath you? He's like, what? You mean, you know, building a location, negotiating with landlords, hiring staff, having people dependent upon you for their food? Like, what's low about that? Like, there's nothing nobler, right, than running a business and making sure there's enough money in the bank account to make payroll. Like, that's a noble pursuit. And it made me think about it differently.
Okay. So then your first business, was it a franchise?
Yeah, it was a spa called Massage Envy, and there were 1,000 already, and they were going to build 1,000 more. And my investment criteria were, I was willing to pass up on the premium return in order for high confidence. So I wanted high confidence, moderate return. And these, most of the massage envies had not failed; that most of them had been successful, and they returned a moderate income for the investment. And I was like, okay, great, that's what I'm looking for. That's the right investment for me because I'm less likely to lose. I'm a pretty hard worker, and that was my start. And it seems like a non-sexy start for me, but it helped me realize all these really sexy results. So maybe your listeners could think about their first business a little differently.
Okay. So what gave you the gumption to say, like, I'm ready to go and be my own boss now. I'm ready to start my own journey because I think there's a lot of people out there who, you know, have a wish kind of thing. Like, I'd love to be an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, but like I have a job right now that I'm not totally miserable in. I'm not real happy with it, but
Yeah.
like I've got a 401k, I've got health insurance, I've got a guaranteed paycheck, and like I do my thing, and so I trade a, a known quantity of misery for a known quantity of paycheck, and you know I'm hesitant to take that next step. Can you talk about that?
Whew, I mean, I can feel that pain. It makes the hair in the back of my neck stand up, just thinking about it, because that is a very difficult decision to make. Let me tell you a story about how I made it, in hopes that keeps it practical for someone going through the same scenario. I was around 40 when I started my first business. And again, I'd like to reiterate this. This is 10, 15 years after I had everything that it takes to try. I could have tried. I wanted to try with a moderate confidence, right? I didn't have the risk tolerance that some entrepreneurs do. I wanted it to succeed. And so I kept, kind of accumulating experience, hoping that it would come to a point where it would reach a threshold and I would suddenly become confident. And I wasn't becoming confident. So I went and got an MBA in my 30s and I thought that would do it. Right. And it wasn't enough for whatever reason. And I had this assignment where I was working in Europe, and it was a very high profile assignment. I was working for a $200 billion company at the time. And this was an assignment reporting directly to the CEO. So I had, all these kind of prestige meetings and appointments. And I was living in a foreign land, right? So extremely satisfying job at this point. And at the end of my position in Europe, they said, okay, Todd, great work, come home. And I thought, this has been such a big project. I'm not ready to come home yet. So I took 3 weeks off and I went to Paris and just took language school in the morning and then went to the museums or went to the opera or golfed with friends in the afternoon. And at the end of the 3 weeks, I'd spent a total of like 2,500 bucks. Now, 2,500 bucks is nothing to sniff at, for some folks. And I totally get that. At the time, I was an extremely high income earner, right? And for me, the relative gap of spending $2,500 in more or less a month in a foreign country doing whatever I wished, right, was a revelation to me. That was a real wake up call. That I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Let's multiply that by 12. That's like $50,000 a year. I knew that I could make $50,000 a year doing lots of jobs, right? And I could be blissfully happy living in a foreign city, taking language, playing golf, whatever. And that's what turned it for me. I'm like, okay, if life can be this good on less income, maybe income isn't everything.
Mm,
Maybe it isn't everything that I had built it up to be,
right.
right? And that was a revelation for me. And so I thought, well, gosh, maybe there's a business I could open because I had saved up some money. Maybe there's a business that I could open that would earn me $100,000 a year, which is twice what I need. So it gives me a little money to save, and it gives me the freedom and flexibility that you assume comes with a small business. And that's when I started looking at open it up, because when you start a business, you think to yourself, how can I make $10 million? How can I make $10 million? Tell me if this resonates with you. Opening a business, how do I make $10 million? That's where a lot of people start. And for me, there aren't that many businesses you can do that.
Right. No, I understand. And I mean, my story was a little bit different in that I started with, okay, how can I at least replicate where I
Yeah.
am now?
Mm-hmm.
And if my baseline is replicating what I'm doing now in the corporate world,
Mm-hmm.
then I know that I can scale that to the next level. But no, I think that there's a lot of people who are starting with like, I want to start with a $10 million idea. How do I
It's
hit the
only
ground
worth
there?
it. Yeah, it's only worth it if I can become a billionaire. And I think that's a limiting belief. A lot of folks talk about mindset these days and how, blocks in mindset can block you from taking the next inevitable step in your journey. And for me, that was the block. Is that it needed to be a big enough project to defend leaving this great job. And in fact, I had it backwards. I was making much more income than I needed. I was making a lot more than 50 or $100,000 at the time, and I thought I needed it all. And when I had this revelation, it's like, well, I don't need all that. I could do with much less. Then the opportunity for business, instead of just looking for the $10 million business, I could look for a business that made all the way down to what my needs were,
Mm,
with the same intent that you had. It's like, hey, if I can get started, if I know that I can make my minimum, bills or whatever, then I'm sure I'll find some way to grow it. There have to be ways of scaling it, if nothing else, just duplicating and triplicating it. And that was the fundamental change in my mindset that helped me get started.
yeah. So, can you talk about like a lot of times entrepreneurs have all right, work with me on this, okay?
Sure.
they they have like beautiful thought processes. They don't have they when they start, they don't have the business side of it. But
Yeah.
what I think that a lot of times have a lot more business acumen than they realize. It, do you agree with
Yeah.
that?
Okay. Fair. Entrepreneurs tend to be a little idealistic, when they want to start, and entrepreneurship does require an awful lot of the operational details. And you'll find that some people loathe entrepreneurship for one of those two reasons, right? That, gosh, the spreadsheets are all perfect, but being an entrepreneur, I have to adapt all the time, and that's a pain in my butt. I don't like this new change stuff. Or, gosh, I had this perfect idea, and who has time to sit down and write down everything, right? Who has time to make a crazy spreadsheet? Who has time to, count the checks that you've written at the end of the month? Shouldn't you just have enough money? And I think that you have to combine those two or partner. Now,
Right.
I'm not a huge fan of partnerships. I've had some partnerships that have, thrived. And the problem is that the partnerships that don't thrive are such a burden from a time and investment standpoint, mental anguish and everything else, that I, urge people to, to, to find a business that you can do on your own, just to keep it streamlined at first, and then consider partnerships later. But
Yeah. Okay. Um, One of the things that you had shared with me in the pre-interview is that the idea of somebody like a plumber, okay,
mm-hmm.
who is going to retire from being a plumber, and they want to do something else, but they have a lifetime of experience
Oh yeah.
in the plumbing world. And I think you had shared with me some ideas about things that they can do
Hmm.
with that. They can start a coaching business for other plumbers, or and you had some other ideas in there. Can you talk about some of those concepts?
Oh my gosh, so many. The vast majority of new companies are spin-offs of existing ones. That's the most likely successful new startup. So if you think about it, one of my friends was at a big printing company, and they did printing for all kinds of stuff. And there was one line that just wasn't keeping up with the rest. It was maybe an industry that was declining or whatever. And so, as big companies do, they wanted to only invest in the fast growing past. So, they were going to release this line. And my friend was looking at it saying, well, that line produces a lot of money, like to one person,
Sure.
right? To a big company, they might say, $3 million, that's it's hardly worth, getting up in the morning, because they have other opportunities. Like my friend Tom, who builds hotels, right? They had other opportunities that were such a better position for them to be in, that for them, a business that only turns over 3 or 5 or $10 million a year is kind of peanuts. Why don't they just release it so they can spend resources on the other ones, right? And he and two of his friends at the company said, we'd like $3 million. That's a lot of money to us, right?
Sure.
And so they just went to their bosses and said, hey, this has been a successful business for 23 years. We realize you just like to stop it, but we talked to a banker and they would finance us. And they took it and they went out and they'd been printing that. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't a fast growth vehicle, but they found ways to make it happen. And so I think that when you're experienced, you can see ways of starting with only moderate risk,
Mm.
right? So for let's go back to the plumber example, right? Plumbers need to buy product from somewhere, right? They don't get it all at Home Depot. They don't get it all at Lowe's. And discount is important to them because some of the margin they make is on the product. So why don't you, as a plumber, start stocking the hard to get, pieces of equipment? And you go out and talk to your old friends. You call up Jerry and say, hey, Jerry, I'm going to retire. But that copper plate that we have such a hard time getting, I got a truckload of it coming in next Thursday. And I'm going to price it reasonably so you don't have to search around for it. And now you've got a wholesale business. And it starts with a truckload of copper plate. And the next thing you know, it's something else.
Right.
Right. So that's an example that non-plumbers wouldn't think of.
Sure.
And it would be harder for non-plumbers to execute because they don't have the relationships. Like, one of the keys to that is being able to call up your friend Jerry and say, this is Todd.
Yeah. I,
And yeah.
no, what I'm thinking is, because of in this example, because of the individual's experience in that plumbing world, they are more familiar with the pain points that
Mm-hmm.
plumbers experience.
Yeah.
And then they're able to say, if I can help solve some of those pain points for folks in a way that works for me,
Mm-hmm.
now I've got a business that is, that it's a guarantee in some ways. It's moderate risk because it's
Mm-hmm.
solving the problem that I experienced, and it's solving a problem that every other plumber experiences, and it's helping them get to where they need to be.
Here's another plumbing example. So, as a plumber, let's say I'm Todd the plumber, and I do 3 jobs a week, right? 12 jobs a month, whatever. And I'm always working because that's when I make income. I'm
Sure.
trading time for money, right? And so when a casino comes around and is going to build a 2 million square foot hotel slash exhibit center, I don't go and bid on that. Why would I bid on that? It would take me literally 300-400 hours to do all the paperwork and the forms and blah blah blah. Plus my team's it's small, right? So let's say you're going to retire, and that MGM's coming to town and building a big casino. So you go over and talk to him and say, hey, I've been a plumber for 23 years. You're going to need 7 or 8 teams. There's nobody in town big enough. You're either going to have to ship them all in from states all around, or get them from Bechtel or someplace very, very expensive. Or I can put together 5 or 6 of the best teams in town. I'll fill out all the paperwork, and you have local talent. They can come back and fix stuff when you need it. How
Yep.
about that? Now all of a sudden, like, you're spending a lot of your time on paperwork and stuff, so you're not lifting a wrench anymore. It's better on your back, and your relationships in town have another value.
Yeah. And I mean, you're literally just looking at your business, looking at your experience, looking at your connections, and seeing them in a way that's not just the typical, like, like, of course, these are my friends, these are my colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
but seeing that network for having a value that is that is greater than just colleagues and friends. And I guess that's got to be part of what you do as a business coach is helping people see their experience, helping people see themselves in a way that that's different than how they would usually look at themselves. Is that kind of classifying what you do properly?
Yeah, I think so. I think helping people find their authentic niches is definitely part of what I do because people do get sidetracked by trying just to play in the businesses where money is, and then sometimes in those cases they don't bring sufficient expertise to stand out. And so I think there is a brainstorming process that comes with getting a consultant or a coach that's on your side that can be brave with you and say things like, "Yeah, I appreciate that crypto is exciting, but like, why would I trust you with crypto? You're a retired plumber."
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of you got to stay in your lane, but you also have to understand that there are a lot of on and off ramps in your particular lane of experience. Right? Is that
Yeah, like, hey, so if crypto's your thing, like if it's a hobby and you're really passionate about crypto, then why don't you take it a step further and say, look, there's a role for NFTs,
okay?
non-fungible tokens in plumbing, and I'm a plumbing expert, and NFTs are a hobby for me. And maybe you're that person that puts those two things together, right? And you create some NFTs that are plumbing related that only people from the plumbing industry could possibly value or understand, and you're right at the center of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're creating you're the bridge between your hobby and your experience, and you're able to do something that
Yep.
utilizes your expertise,
Mm-hmm.
that produces something of value, and also is something that you're passionate about and that you find personally rewarding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Todd, listen, if people want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
My coaching consulting team has a Facebook group, and I think that's the best way to interact with us. It's called Real Business Coaching. Our consulting firm is called Beachview Coaching. So either of those places, Facebook is our favorite vehicle, just because everybody can get on it, everyone knows how. And then of course we use other platforms. But I think the right way to reach us is just facebook.com/real business coaching.
All right, and I will make sure and put the link to that in the show
Cool.
notes so that people can go in there. And I know that you've got a bunch of videos and different things that are all
Yeah.
available within that group for folks. Yeah. So listen, Todd Randall, thank you so much. It is now time for 3 questions to establish your humanity. Are you ready for these, my
Um,
friend?
I hope I pass this test. All right, I'm game.
Okay. So, what is the phone app that you most frequently use?
All right, let me just open. I'm going to open it and see what's first. Block Doku. Oh my gosh, a game. Seriously.
There you go. You know what? You're in a judgment-free zone. It's okay. I'm not. There's nothing I'm going to say that either way. But the good news for you is that you are in a place where you can you make the choices about what you choose to do with your time, and I am not going to judge you for
It
that.
comes from a childhood anxiety of not being productive enough. And so when I'm working, if I have a minute, I'll turn it on and do it because I feel like I'm still being productive, even though it's just a game. Like, I'm accumulating points, mom. Mom. If she was still with us, she'd be so proud of me. But anyway.
Of course. So when you were a kid, did you
Mhm.
eat the crust on your sandwiches or did you avoid the crust on your sandwiches?
Oh, crust is the best part.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice. All right.
Love it.
So you're down in Florida now. You're in rural Florida, so I'm assuming that you're um, not real close to the coast. What's your opinion on like seafood? Seafood, like everybody comes down to Florida, and you need to get the crabs and the grouper and all of the.
Yeah.
So is seafood overrated because there's other Florida fare that you can get, or do you have a go-to in the seafood world?
That's a good. In Florida, I'm not sure. I've only been here recently, and I'm not sure that there's a specialty for Florida. But I'll tell you what I do, because I have friends who are divers and in the sustainability world, and what they tell me is that some fish is at risk of being fished out,
Okay.
And some fish is being replaced. Like if when you order salmon in a restaurant, it's very likely it is actually not salmon; it's something else. It's a sea bass is even better example where you'll get snapper or something else that's the same color as sea bass, but because sea bass is so fished out. And so I always look on an app. The Monterey Aquarium, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, has a fantastic app that you can just download from their museum, and it tells you, green, yellow, red,
Okay.
which fish are kind of sustainably safe to eat. And I use that tool more than local stuff because in Florida they probably fly in just as much fish as they catch on the ocean.
There you go. A valuable resource for all of us to make sure that what we are eating is sustainable and is good for our planet. Hey, listen, Todd
Yeah.
Randall, thank you so much for being here. For all of my listeners, thank you for being a part of this. You guys are the reason why this podcast exists. And I will remind you all that when you stop learning, you stop living. Have a great day, everybody.